Welcome to Dr. Akmal Makhdum's YouTube channel. He's a psychiatrist, author, and social commentator. Today we will be continuing our Forgotten Philosophies series and a discussion on Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This is part 2, looking at the social contract. We discussed briefly in the previous video, so now let's look at it in depth.
Okay. Obviously, 10 minutes won't allow us to talk about Rousseau's social contract, but let's try to capture it, or some parts of it. The most striking part of the social contract is, of course, the first bit when he says that man is born free and he's everywhere in chains. Now, this was something that attracted the reader immensely, because at that time everybody was in chains. So either people were being enslaved or they were colonized. There were even the so-called free people were also subject to monarchies and absolute monarchies. So Rousseau presented social contract in which he talked about the state of nature of man. And what he felt was that man was basically free. It was his right to have his freedom. And he also believed in equality. Of course, he did not believe in equality of age, that the older age cannot be equal to the younger age. A more intelligent person cannot be equal with a less intelligent person, and a healthier person cannot be equal to an unhealthy person. But he believed in general in terms of their rights, their social rights. The biological dispositions understood, the distinctions are there. But that did not mean that if you were physically stronger, you were socially stronger too. That if you were physically healthier, that you would be socially healthier than the other person. So this was something that was very different, because the idea of God giving power to the monarch and the lords and the earls and the sultans, that was something that was being challenged with this thought. So what he believed, that anything that you enter as a contract has to be morally acceptable and morally equitable. So the idea was that there is power and then there is authority. So I may not have more power than the other person, but I should have similar authority. I should have the same social authority like anybody else. So what he also felt, that if a person enters into a contract of loyalty, it has to be in his own terms. He should not be compelled, because then that becomes slavery. So this was something that was totally revolutionary, that the people needed to have a construct of society where everybody was equal. Now, some people say that modern socialism or the Soviet communism was also derived from Rousseau's thought, and Rousseau's thought then you find in Marx's writings. But there is a difference, that Marx was only focusing on the producing labor force, because he believed in the labor force's power and control over the means of production. Whereas Rousseau was a believer in private property. But what he believed is that if somebody had more power, physical power, military power, he could then take over the weaker person's property. So how could you enter into a social contract where the physically weaker, the militarily weaker, could retain his property and ownership as much as the other person? And that is why he believed in a kind of society which was equitable. And that is what was totally revolutionary and unheard of at that time. So, when Rousseau talks of the social contract and the form of government, he believes that democracy is not possible, or from his writing, it appears that democracy is not possible in larger countries, in countries with massive populations, with huge differences of language, culture, religions, and norms. What he believes is that democracy is possible, and he doesn't mention democracy too much, but from him, democracy requires homogeneity, that people should be similar. They should be similar in nature, similar in attitude. And what he believed is that democracy has to be very simple and austere. There must not be show of money and wealth and power. And democracy should be for smaller city-states. And the example that I mentioned in the last clip was that, like Geneva, people were simpler. They were not ostentatious. Now, what he suggests is that we talked of the moral authority and the legal authority, the power, the physical power versus the moral power, where it was the moral power that made everybody equal, and he believed in equality of everyone. So what he believed was that there are personal freedoms that cannot be compromised. But then when he moves and starts to discuss collective freedoms, that's where it appears that he can give justification to things like the oppression of the French Revolution, which killed lots of people, and oppression of by the communist forces or the communist system, because that is what he suggests, that the individual freedom, when he talks about it, he believes it to be indivisible, that individual freedom is primal, it has to be retained, and it is absolutely essential. But then when he expands it into a collective, then what he suggests is that there has to be a general good, a general will, something which is good for all, which has to be moral and sensible. So when he talks about that, then he talks of the individual contributing to the general will in such a manner that the individual becomes one with the collective. And the collective's benefit becomes the individual's benefit. And what he says is that there cannot be, and this is very strange, that there cannot be any disparity or difference of opinion between the individual and the collective if both are moral and both are good. So what it suggests is a kind of 1984 George Orwell, where everybody has to think the same, everybody has to be the same. And that's where his criticism, and sometimes very scathing criticism, comes.
And that's what we will discuss in the next episode. Is there anything you'd like to add in the last minute regarding the social contract and its relevance, its contribution?
Yeah, I think when it goes into detail, it starts to fall apart a little. But the thrust of it, the humanity of it, or the beginning of it in terms of establishing, was probably one of the greatest revolutions in one of the most oppressive times in human history.
And we have to look at it in context, of course. Great, thank you so much. If you enjoyed the episode, click like, comment, and do subscribe to the channel. And we will be back with another episode soon. Thank you so much for watching.